This is Greg Orloff, and I have the pleasure today of speaking with the CEO of Rataflow. This is Ilan Barda, also the co-founder. Welcome, Ilan.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you, and thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. I'm looking forward to having the conversation. Maybe we just start off with kind of a macro topic of resources in general around cyber systems and cybersecurity. It seems like there's shortages in talent in the trades as well as technology sectors such as cybersecurity. I keep reading about it and hearing about it almost on a daily basis, and it's growing. It's a growing void. That lack of resources I think it's pushing organizations up against a wall. CISOs are trying to secure the connected devices and machinery that they've invested in, the companies have made over the past several years. It's kind of opened a wider discussion around outsourcing cyber activities. From your vantage point, Ilan, what does that mean for teams who are outsourcing cybersecurity?
So I think, first of all, I agree very much. I think that especially in general in cybersecurity, there is a lack of resources, and people are looking for whether how to recruit, how to train people, or how to outsource the activities. I think in OT security, it's even more difficult because it's a rather new area and it requires expertise both on cybersecurity and on the manufacturing side. So it's very difficult to find the relevant people. So we do see more and more companies, because there is also some kind of an sense of urgency. So most companies or many companies are trying to outsource this kind of activities. And I think it's a good idea, because the fact that you don't have the resources also combined with the fact that from our experience, if you build the infrastructure in the right way, you will not have events on, every 2 minutes, you will not have an event from your OT security. So you don't necessarily need a team that will be there all the time, a full-time job. It's something that is actually can be combined for multiple customers and use resources in a shared way, in a very effective way. So I think these two things together actually drive the outsourcing in a very strong way for OT security. And from our discussions with the customers, and we usually try to enable our partners, the MSSPs, to be able to provide this kind of services in the right way to their end customers. So we see a few things that are important. First of all, when you are outsourcing this kind of service, from our experience, it's important that you will no longer focus on what is the product that you want to buy. You need to specify what is the service that you are looking for. You don't actually care what is the product that the MSSP is using, which kind of a SIM tool, which kind of an IDS, and so on and so forth. As long as they do what you need in terms of the functionality, you need to loosen up on the issue of the products. And we find that the customers that were able to do this actually get a much better service eventually.
Do you see any differences between organizational size? Because there's from the mom and pop shops that are looking for cyber systems up to those 800-pound gorilla organizations. Anything from a lens there?
I think that there is a difference, because usually the smaller companies will try to outsource everything. So they will just outsource the IT and the OT and not just cyber, but also everything in terms of their IT and OT in general, and not just the cyber security. For the bigger companies, first of all, their IT in many cases will be in-house, and also on the cybersecurity, they will try to do some of it on their own. So the MSSP will usually be kind of a tier 2, someone that is also providing you some of the expertise. For example, what we see is that it's also very important to do the initial phase. As I mentioned, OT security, if you do it right, it should not generate too many alerts on a continuous basis. So it is important to do it right. The first phase, the onboarding, should be done in an in-depth way. And I think for the bigger companies, this is the kind of the tier 2 that they want to outsource, the right way to do the initial onboarding, the analysis of some of the more complex alerts, some periodic updates of the threat landscape. This is what they will get, and not really outsourcing everything.
Got it. No, that makes sense. In terms of business impact itself, what's your perspective on? I'm going to make a statement. Just tell me what your thoughts are. Cybersecurity risk should be viewed through the lens of potential business impact, not just vulnerability levels. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's very important actually to understand this difference between vulnerabilities and the risk and the business impact, because we do see that many customers start with vulnerability scanning, vulnerability management, asset visibility that very easily drives you also to the vulnerability side. And it's just the wrong view. First of all, you get tons of vulnerability issues because in many cases in OT you are using old devices. And on the other end, it's not really important. What is important is to understand what is the business impact for that. And I think it's very important because it also drives the discussion with the business owner. So when you want to get eventually a budget for OT cyber, when you're speaking about the business impact, then it's much easier to bring it to a board. It's much easier to involve the business owners. And I think that also when you are talking about business impact, once you even started this discussion, it's important to understand business impact is not just about the revenues that this production line generates. It's also about how fast you can recover in case there is a failure in this area. And, if it is a supply chain issue, what is it driving internally? But even in many cases, we were talking to some plastics manufacturing that their customer was some of the bigger automotive manufacturers. They don't want to have any cyber issue because that would mean probably they will lose their long-term contract with some of these big automotive companies. So you need to take into account all of these things and not just the simple dollar value of the production line.
Yeah, it's much more of a complex issue to sift through that. I think one of the challenges for organizations that embrace digitalization is sifting through that ever increasing level of information. To drive ultimately you want to drive decision making, right? So from an OT cyber perspective, do you have any recommendations for CISOs on how to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak?
Yeah, I think we have been going exactly through this route when we were working with customers. Initially, we were very proud when we were doing the first mapping of a network and giving the customer 500 pages of what we have seen. And he was saying,
right.
Thank you, but no, thank you. I don't have the time or the energy.
What do I do with this, right?
Exactly. So we took us some time to understand that actually less is more in that sense. So I think eventually, and we are still working on to kind of purify it, but the idea is to make something of a very clear dashboard. Again, less is more. So we try to look on three aspects in this dashboard. One is what's happening first of all, it should be kind of a periodic dashboard on a monthly basis or so on. Second thing, we try to take into account three parameters. One is what is changing in the external threat landscape. So you do want to know what are the new attackers, what are the new tactics, what are the new vulnerabilities, and so on and so forth. The second thing is you want to know what is changing your internal network, whether you have some new devices, some new changes in your network, maybe you installed some new security controls and all that stuff. And the third thing is that you want to know also what happened in my network, for example, in the last month in terms of alerts, whether there were all kinds of issues, even if I handled them and I don't think they were important, still I want to see a summary of how many alerts because I do want to see some kind of a trend. And eventually the idea is that this I would say are the three main pillars of the dashboard. What is also required after you give this kind of a dashboard is that you try to make it actionable. Eventually, of course, the CISO would need to decide what they do, but we try to give this kind of three parts of the dashboard and then also to give our view about what's the actionable output of this kind of trends in the dashboard.
No, that sounds like solid advice. You're bringing another thought to mind for me. It's kind of around the whole internal, external points that you just talked about. Organizations often struggle to manage that balance between, what's the market dictating or even regulatory governmental influences, and what are our internal drivers, what's our board want us to do, and what are our goals for the upcoming month, let alone year or longer term vision. Those two opposing sides, that public compliance almost in the form of regulations or standards, and versus that internal governance that ensures operations and outputs meet internal standards. What are your thoughts on recent increases in government involvement in these areas? Is this positive? Is this negative?
I think, first of all, on one hand, it's positive because it is driving more and more organizations to do something about it. So we do see that the fact that there are more and more regulations actually drives the industry in terms of a kind of sense of urgency. So I think it's good. The other thing that is important, and it's still not yet there in some of the places, is that we believe that the regulation should be very specific. So it should not be just you should do something, but it should give you some guidance. You should do something about intrusion detection, about vulnerabilities, about risk, about SOC, about multi-factor authentication, and so on. So it should be a bit more specific than just saying you should do something. I think it's always difficult to do the first step. So if the regulation tell you you need to monitor this and these devices, and you need to check, for example, their I don't know, firmware version and vulnerabilities and so on. It's a very good first start. So I think that there is an improvement in that sense, and I think it should continue because that's a very big benefit of the regulations. You know, they have done a lot of homework on their side, so if they can output it in a way that is more specific, it makes it easier for everybody eventually. I think what we see in the market, and that's also what we are trying to drive the discussion with our customers, is that you need to have this kind of mix between what's driven by the regulation and your internal governance. And the way to do it is the way that we usually present it to the customer, is that the final outcome would be compliance to the regulations, but usually probably it will take you, I don't know, 3 years. So what you want to do along these 3 years, and also you want to have this kind of a discussion with the regulator, is that you show them that your roadmap along these 3 years is actually dictated by the risk. So you do first thing you do in the first 6 months, what is critical because of your risk, because of your business impact. And then as you move forward to get closer and closer to the full compliance, every step is actually driven by the risk and the impact to your, securing your business eventually.
Got it. No, it's that balance between internal, external risk.
Yeah.
Well, maybe peel the onion on a particular sector then for a little bit.
So for us, the biggest sector, this was the sector that we started with, is the power energy sector.
Okay.
And still, even though nowadays you have many sectors, so we see much more activities now in the water, in the transportation, in the manufacturing, building management, and so on and so forth. Still, for us, power is still the largest sector, again, probably just because we started there.
Sure.
So I think there are, actually, it's a very interesting sector because there are very big differences between the different subsectors in that. So you have the big power generations, which I think they are to a large extent, they are the most advanced. So they have started it quite early with issues like the NERC in the US. So they started it already a long time ago. And usually they will have their own team internally. They will also have a lot of lessons learned from their peers in the industry and so on. So usually they will already have quite a good setup in place, and they will be more looking already on the next step. So they have some kind of intrusion detection, they will have some kind of alert management and so on. Most of the cases, they will be now looking on how to optimize threat intelligence feed, to make it something more actionable about what do I need to do now and so on and so forth. So that's for the generation. I think they're actually in quite a good situation in that sense. If we are looking on to the second extreme, I would say, to the distribution, the smaller substations, there, first of all, it's a very early phase because, the scale there is thousands of sites, so it's very difficult to decide how to deploy such a solution. First of all, there is an issue of scalability. How do I get even to all of these sites? How do I manage it? Do I have the budget to do all of that? Some of it is very old and so on and so forth. So what we see is that people in the distribution side, first of all, they are just starting in these kind of types of solutions. And the second thing is that I would say the right way to do it is to decide where some priorities. You don't want to do it all over the place in one day. In one time, you want to do it with some level of hierarchy, saying, maybe now I'm doing some upgrades on my secondary substations in one sub-region. As part of the upgrade of the RTUs, I will also install some cybersecurity. If I upgrade some of the communication, I can also install some cybersecurity. Don't try to enforce it all over the place in one time. It's just too big to try and do it. So this is the way that we see that some of them that are successful are doing it as part of their ongoing upgrades and this kind of stuff. And the other sector, which we also see kind of subsector, which we see that is also emerging quite fast, is all the renewable energy. Renewable energy, because it's very much a private sector, was very much lagging behind the regular generation, the legacy kind of generation. And we see that recently it's also ramping up in a very strong way. It's much more difficult to drive it inside the renewable energy than the big generation, because first of all, it's a private operation. So of course, cost is much more important. And also because in general, renewable energy is still trying to justify their economical value. It's very difficult to drive additional cost into their initial operations. So driving there some security in place, it's something that is still a challenge. What is happening is that on one hand, first of all, there is some drive of the regulation. So the regulation is going down from the big generation also to this renewable energy. So it just forces them to do something, which is good. And I think also from the customer side, the ones that give them the license or the one that is buying from them the power plant, then there are more and more requirements on this kind of solutions. So for them, it's very important to do a solution that will be easy to operate. So for them, they are not experts on cybersecurity, just something that they need to add into their overall package. They have enough things on the other things, so they want to make it something that will be quite easy to install, quite easy to operate. I would say in a large extent, make it seamless. They don't really want to become experts on cybersecurity. But for us, actually, this is the fastest growing sector, is this subsector of the renewable energy, because it was kind of lagging behind and now it's catching up in a very fast way.
Interesting. It's interesting to see how they're pulling back in. Well, contrast that against the water sector for me, because I know you folks work there too. I mean, where are they at in terms of technology adoption and integration?
Yeah, for me it was always a mystery why the water sector was so behind compared to the power. I never understood, because if you look, for me at least, if you look on the the criticality of water versus power, I'm always saying, with power you can find some alternatives. With water, it's very difficult to find an alternative. So I never really understood why water was so behind. And usually when I was talking to customers, they were saying, just if you look on the water utilities, usually they don't have the funds that the power utilities are getting for some reason, probably something much bigger than what we understand. But this is the reality. But I think in the last couple of years, or maybe 18 months, we do see that it's actually ramping up in a very fast way. I think because there were a lot of attacks. So both in the US, in Israel, in other places in Europe, there have been quite a lot of attacks on water utilities just because they were lagging. So compared to the power utilities, they were very much behind. They did not have the right level of solutions in place. So of course they were attacked. And I think because there were more and more such attacks, eventually they understood that they need to secure it. Also, not just that they were attacked, also in very many cases, they are much more vulnerable. There are much smaller locations. Usually they have cellular remote access and so on. So it's even much more, it's easier to even hack into these sites. So now we see a lot of activities in this area, very much like the renewable energy. You need to make it simple for them. You need to make it seamless for their deployment, for their operations. Again, they don't want to become experts on cybersecurity, but they are actually quite eager to do something. So you need to find the solution that will make it simple for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I appreciate the insights, Ilan. Thank you so much.